Now.
So good evening and welcome to Advocacy 101, How to Make Your Voice Heard, a conversation with Julie Stokes, hosted jointly by the United Way of Southeast Louisiana, Women's United, Retire United, and Young United. I'm Toya Barnes-Teamer. I'm actually a member of the board for the United Way of Southeast Louisiana and also proud to serve as the this year for Women United. I have been involved with the United Way, oh my God, since 1988. Don't hold it against me. I actually started as a loan executive when we had loan executives. And then from there, I've served on several committees, served as a board member, served as a consultant around diversity, equity, and inclusion work, now back on the board in my role as the chair for Women United, and just pleased to be with you all this evening. I'm really excited about this topic, and I also have to admit to you all, I'm excited to be a part of this with these dynamic women who are a part of this conversation this evening. So with that, I do want to cover a couple of housekeeping notes for you. And so, Mary, if we want to go to that slide. So we are recording this conversation and we will be sharing it with all of our registrants. This conversation, we want you to be able to share your thoughts and questions in the chat. This is a group of women who likes interactive conversation and not just talking to ourselves. So we really look forward to you putting information in the chat, but we also want to let you know that we have a set aside Q&A session at the end where we will address all questions that come up in the chat. And I'm also going to ask Julie and Charmaine that if we run out of time and there are additional questions in the chat, if we could just do a Q&A written that Mary, maybe we can send to all participants so that they would have that information on the back end.
Sure.
What we like to, great. So what we like to next is to ask each participant to put in the chat your name and then also which United Way of Southeast Louisiana group you are affiliated with. So if you are a part of Women United, you can put your name and put Women United. If you're a part of Retire United, and also if you are a part of Young Leaders United, we would really like for you to put your name and your affiliation in the chat so that we know who's in the chat and who we will be communicating with. From there, I want to introduce our speaker. So as I mentioned, we have Julie Stokes, who we were just joking about the fact that we put as a recovering state legislator. She's like, I'm not sure if I'm there yet, but she's also the founder of Ellevate Louisiana and co-founder of the of the Cancer Advocacy Group of Louisiana. And of course, we have the dynamic Charmaine Cassiope, who is the Executive Vice President and COO of United Way of Southeast Louisiana. And so with that, we want to go to the next slide to just speak to our agenda. We don't want me spending a whole lot of time talking with you all. We really want to get to the advocacy part of the work, but we want to start with an icebreaker. We will do an introduction to advocacy, and then we will get to our question and answer session. So with the icebreaker, we know that everyone has faced challenges during COVID-19, some more so than others. I won't even start to cry a river over all of the things that I've had to address during COVID-19. But what we love to hear from you is your perspective on how you would fill in this prompt. The last year has been so challenging, if only I, and then you could put I had, or if only we had. So if you could go ahead and take a couple of minutes, look at this statement and fill in the blank in the chat. So let me go to the chat and see if anybody has put anything in there. So the last year has been so challenging, if I or we had, and I'm looking in the chat. Ooh, somebody said if I had not gained COVID-19 pounds, yes, that would be me. That would be me as well. Anybody else? Oh, wow. Yes, this is a great one. More reserve funds. Someone else listed equitable access to health care. Oh, somebody put a private, Julie, that would be you, a private plane and not gaining weight. Yeah. More time to catch up on work. Yeah, Julie, I feel like honestly the days have expanded and not been, you would think that most of us are working home, it would be smaller and we would have more time. And honestly, I feel like I'm even managing double Zoom meetings at the same time. So it gets very interesting. Um, Time management, work, personal, yes. Mental energy, yes, yes. I'm also feeling fatigued with all of the various Zoom meetings and Zoom calls that we're having. So let's now flip to the next prompt. There is a second one. So for this one, when all is said and done, I or we want what? What do we want? So on the other side of COVID, all is said and done, what do we want? Oh, I love this. Somebody put peace. Yes, to never wear a mask again. Yes, to be able to travel. Yes, these are great. Okay, to be able to interact with everyone freely. Yes, honestly, I just miss hugging everybody, y'all. That's my biggest thing. It's like I just want to hug everybody I see. So to be with family, yes, excellent. Oh, yes, yes. Gregory, yes, I'm with you on the big hug. Oh, for all people to have healthy, happy lives of love and plenty. Yes. All right. This is wonderful. This is wonderful. So from there, that's our icebreaker. If anybody else joins and want to continue to add things in, please do. And what I want to do at this point is turn it over to Charmaine to kick off the conversation around Advocacy 101. Thank you all.
Well, thank you so much, Toya. And I agree with you. It was wonderful to have an icebreaker to hear what's going on in everybody's lives and what they're hoping for. I say good evening to everyone who's joining us for this program tonight, How We Make Our Voices Heard. Here at United Way of Southeast Louisiana, we place a strong focus on policy and advocacy. We know that nearly every social and community inequity has roots in policy and advocacy. To achieve our mission of eradicating poverty and achieving our vision of creating equitable communities where everybody's healthy, educated, and financially stable, we know we must advocate to remove policy barriers that limit opportunity, in particular for vulnerable households across this great state. It is also extremely important that we focus on leveraging our financial investment in program funding to advance policies that provide systems level change over and throughout our community, which we so desperately need. Working collaboratively in a strong bipartisan effort, we can make profound, great progress to meet the needs and the challenges that so many of our Louisiana citizens are facing. As many of you know, we have already impacted greatly policy and advocacy in the work that we are doing here at United Way of Southeast Louisiana. I would be remiss in not acknowledging the extraordinary support of Women United, our Board of Trustees, and our volunteers who serve on our Policy and Advocacy Committee. I can tell you that we have impacted tremendously for this state, increased investment in early care and education, in extremely impacting access to women's health policy, economic stability, workforce training, criminal justice reform. We've advocated for historic implementation of legislation for domestic violence laws that have now served what's in the best interest of victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and we have literally worked to transform Louisiana's foster care system Now, this is just to mention a few, but get ready and buckle up because today we have a real treat for you. We have with us the Honorable Julie Stokes, a tremendous legislative champion and an asset to the great state of Louisiana, but more importantly, an incredible friend and a partner to United Way of Southeast Louisiana. Julie Stokes is a CPA, nonpartisan policy advocate. She's a tremendous civic leader, a recovering state legislator. Over her 7 years of service in the Louisiana legislature, Julie gained the remarkable reputation as a passionate advocate for comprehensive, nonpartisan fiscal policy. Leaving public office behind in 2020, she opened Flame Consulting to continue supporting projects that she's extremely passionate about, including the founding of Ellevate Louisiana, which empowers women leaders throughout Louisiana by connecting and educating them on the many challenges impacting our state with data-driven, nonpartisan solutions to making a better future for all of Louisiana. Welcome to you, Julie. I can't tell you how thrilled we are to have you participating live and in person in tonight's program. So as we get started, I think it's important that we start by simply letting everybody get to know you just a little bit better. What did your journey to becoming a state legislator look like? And if you would, could you share with us what compelled you to run for public office?
Thank you, Charmaine, and thank you for that very nice introduction and for being such great advocates yourself. I'm so proud to be associated with the United Way and the great work that you guys are doing, that we're doing, right? But most of you guys. So, okay, so, you know, I was educated my whole life in Jefferson Parish Public Schools. I was really brought up in I was probably an Alice family. I mean, honestly, we were probably an Alice family. So I went to UNO because I could go there for free. At UNO, I really got involved in leadership. You know, I got in a sorority and I ended up being the president, the membership chairman. I mean, all different years, thank God. But, you know, got really involved and did a whole lot there. When I graduated with my CPA or my accounting degree, I went to work at the big accounting firms, and there they wanted you to get involved in the community. And so that led me to the Young Leadership Council, which then led me to wanting to start a Jefferson Parish Young Leadership Council, which led me to the Jefferson Chamber and being the second president of the Jefferson Young Leaders, and then getting on the chamber board and then getting on the government committee for the chamber, and then it just kind of flows out from there. And I kept getting involved in different groups that, like transition teams, when the government would switch over, you know, to a new administration, and just kept getting more and more involved in policy. And then at some point, you know, right when I ran, I was actually, before that, I was going to run for Kenner City Council. And I decided that the timing wasn't right. My kids were little. Hurricane Katrina came and took out my house and nobody else's house on my street. And I thought, that's a message from the dear Lord. And I opted to not get into that race. And it was perfect because I spent some years on a deep dive and really got to know myself and what my passions really were and where my interests intersected with the needs of the community. And then lo and behold, the perfect number of years later, an opportunity came about when my predecessor resigned his seat to take another job. And I was encouraged to run. And it was the most exciting, hardest work I ever did. But 3 months later, was elected in the primary and served in the Louisiana legislature. And it was life-changing. I really enjoyed it. It's quite an experience.
Well, fortunately for us, I think it's fair to say that a lot of us participating in this conversation tonight who happen to be women think it's critically important for women like you because we need more women at the table and certainly more women in policy. So God bless you for taking that bold and courageous step. But more broadly, could you share with us what advocacy means to you, and why should we tonight inspire everyone who's participating in this program to become engaged in policy and advocacy?
So when I saw that question, I went and I looked up the definition. That's just, I'm a CPA, I can't help myself, right? So it said public support or recommendation of a particular cause or policy. What this means to me is that you have a call on your life, like everybody on this phone call, and I think all of us, whether that call is to be president of the United States or to be the best housekeeper that you can be. You know, I feel like everybody's got a call, and a lot of times that calls toward family or whatever your passion is. In there and in that passion is something that has to do with how this world is working. And that's where your unique perspective is so important to get across in the legislative process, in the government process. You know, that could be at the state level. It could be that you want to see better perks in your community. So it could be at the parish level. You know, you could be looking at, you could be somebody that cares very deeply about foreign policy and you want to get involved at the federal level. But without having a say in how the laws are made, the laws won't echo any of your beliefs necessarily. You might get lucky.
Well, I certainly appreciate that perspective. Now, let's try to explore how to advocate effectively, because I think what are some of the primary ways that an individual listening tonight can lobby a legislator? I think it's fair to say that we know you could phone them, you can email them, you can meet with them in person, you could do a letter writing campaign. But from your perspective, having been a legislator yourself, which of these methods do you believe are most impactful?
Thank you. Yeah. So forgive that phone that you just heard, because I have made my system on do not disturb in every way possible. I even checked. Anyway, so forgive me for that. But okay, so, you know, you do have all these different levels at which you can advocate. But I think that there's certain truths that hold at the local, municipal, it could be municipal, your parish, your state, your federal level. And so the very first thing you need to know is what level handles what. And, you know, generally, I mean, I could go through an entire litany of that, but that would take up a lot of our time. But you can research a lot of that online and find out, like, people will go to the, like, say, Jefferson Parish or Orleans, people will go to the parish council and want to talk about schools, but that needs to happen at the school board level. You know, people will go and talk to someone at the state level about removing a tree. And I'm like, let's call your council person. So the first thing you need to know is where your issue is legislated, on what level. Then the next thing that I think is important is to go get involved in the groups in your neighborhood, in your state, that are engaged in the kind of issues that you're involved in. You know, if it's removing the tree down the street, you know, it might be your civic association, or it might be the beautification committee in your parish. You know, if you're interested in tax policy, like I always was, it's probably going to be at your legislative level or your federal level. Then the next thing, you know, is when you're involved in all those groups, you're inevitably going to meet some of these difference makers. You're going to meet the people on your city council, your parish council, if you're involved in the right groups. And that's going to start to open that door. You'll start to meet other difference makers, and meaning other people like you that want to advocate. And you'll band together in groups of people that want to advocate for the same thing. So the most important thing to remember is to put yourself in the right place first. Then second, I would say that there's just no substitute for being there in person and meeting with someone. For a while, when I was thinking about running for Kenner City Council, I went to all the council meetings. I mean, I went to everyone, and they knew that I was going to be there listening. I was going to be a force in this world. And, you know, and when I say that, I don't mean one of those that goes up to the microphone and, you know, complains about everything, because then they turn you off. It just is what it is. You know, you have to be super constructive in how you criticize things and how you handle people. But first of all, being there in person. If that's at the state legislature, and I know that all of this is a little harder right now because of COVID. And hopefully we're, coming around the corner of that battle. But at the Capitol, you can go visit the Capitol. You can be in committee meetings, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, I believe. But being there in person and being able to make that eye contact and giving your business card. Never go anywhere without a business card. And I would always make sure that I had a pocket so that, because that's a woman thing. The men that might be on this call don't have that problem, but we do. So I always have an in and an out pocket, honestly, because I love to network. So I'd have a card out, card in. And at the end of the night, I'd go through and accumulate who I had met. Short of that, for instance, if you really want to know your, that would be parish council person or your state representative or state senator, call their office and ask for a meeting. I've had several constituents that did that. And a constituent can be somebody that lives in your district, or it can be someone who's a constituent because they're involved in a subject matter. So, I had constituents that lived in all parts of the state because they would be interested in something that I tended to legislate on. So be sure to get in touch with those people. If you have the appropriate cause to sit down and talk to them and get to know them and let your heart and mind about your issue be heard in a constructive way, do that. Other big ways are sending emails to the person that you want to advocate to. There's also, sending emails, making phone calls, when you want to do that in mass, like when you're in a group and you can send a whole bunch of emails and you can send a whole bunch of letters. And that's effective sometimes, but there's nothing more effective than that personal relationship.
Well, I appreciate the way you put that in the context of collaborative engagement, because I think it's fair to say what you were telling us is engage with like-minded individuals who may share your passion around an issue, because you not only connect to them, but you may learn something and then take that through a personal relationship, because relationships build trust. And I guess now I'm going to go on to the next part of the question that I wanted to ask you, and it is that you and I know firsthand relationship building is a huge part of effective advocacy. Do you have any tips for advocates who are trying to build strong relationships with key legislators? And in particular, I think often we feel like you've got to go directly to the legislator, but oftentimes their staffs are so valuable in that process. So let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, well, to start from where you just stopped, getting to know that person that picks up the call when you call their legislative district office, their council office, is really important, because I know for me, the majority of the people I actually sat down and talked to were more or less vetted by my assistant, my aide. He became an amazing resource for me. He knew everybody that I was coming in contact with. He vetted everybody. So developing that relationships can be really important. You might have times, and I mean, if you're doing this right, you will have times like when you're at a chamber event and that elected official's there and you have a chance after they speak or just seeing them to go across the room, shake their hand, change business cards. But to really get that one-on-one sit down, quite often you're going to have to be vetted by that person, because there are a lot of people out there that can be really confrontational, and there are people too that don't like they're just, their issues might not even be something that you can help them with. You're like, well, I can sit down and listen to you about this issue, but why don't I refer you over to this other legislator or this other person that really champions that? So the main thing that I would say, though, is that once you have that face-to-face or telephone, that is to be positive. Because I find that the biggest problem these days is just that people believe something because they've heard facts or sometimes some rhetoric that leads them to believe a certain position. And, they'll, on Facebook especially, I mean, if you want to have a relationship with people, don't go off on them on Facebook. Like, this is important. Like if you already know them and y'all don't like each other, then fine. If you want to go off on them on Facebook, but don't go off on somebody on Facebook when there's a chance to build a real relationship. And what I always do in my own personal, I'm not perfect at this either, because it's hard sometimes, because a lot of these issues are very, they're emotionally driven issues, but replace that anger you might feel. Like if you're frustrated by something, or if you're angry about a situation and you want to bring that to your elected official, vet through that on your own and try to look at the situation with big massive thunder. Try to look at that situation with curiosity instead of anger or frustration, because what they like to see is that you care deeply, you're willing to learn, you're willing to hear the nuances, and you really just want to make a difference. So I always say replace anger or frustration with curiosity and start down that road of building that relationship, understanding that person's take on the situation or that person's opinion, and sharing your opinion back is the most constructive way to change an opinion too.
Right. Well, I think one of the things that's been most valuable in my experience, because I've actually served for a U.S. Senator and now I'm on the side of advocating. So my professional career, I think I've learned firsthand, there's no greater opportunity to build consensus and to have someone really listen to you is if you demonstrate respect. Do your homework, demonstrate respect, because you're right. We're not always going to get everybody that we're advocating with or trying to engage with to agree 100% in what you're doing. But today we may not agree on this issue, but tomorrow we might just be making extraordinary progress on another issue that we could find consensus around. So let's pivot a little and start focusing on the actual legislative process. For individuals who are just starting out as advocates, it can often be incredibly intimidating and often very confusing. Can you walk us through the legislative process and share with us how does a bill become a law?
Okay, so I'm going to take this process strictly from the Louisiana legislature. This is how it goes there. So depending on where you're advocating, it might be a little bit different. But generally, what you saw when today's still Wednesday, what you saw on Monday was the first day of session. So on that first day of session, every bill that's been filed is read out. So the speaker stands at the front of the House, and the Senate president stands at the front of the Senate and basically introduces every bill. And in that introduction, sends it to a committee. So when they do that, that kind of gives you the heads up about where things are going to be heard, say, for instance. So you'll know that your chance at a public testimony will be in that committee hearing, which would come next. So after you hear where it's going to be referred to, then you watch the internet, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but you'll see that bill come up on a committee schedule one day. That's when you have your chance in committee to go do public testimony. After that, it's when things are before the House floor or the Senate floor, there's no public testimony involved. So your only chance to get in there in a public way, in a formal way, is in that committee hearing. In that meeting, there'll be the committee, which, in the House will tend to be about 15 legislators. In the Senate, maybe 7 or 8, maybe 7, 6 actually. And they'll hear the bill. You'll have your chance to put in a green card or a red card, saying, or a white card if you're there for information. But usually if you're somebody going up to advocate, you're going to want to say, I like this bill or I don't like this bill. So you pick that color card. And then if you say that you want to speak, you get that chance to speak at that committee meeting. At that meeting, they're either going to kill that bill or they're going to refer it back to the House, sometimes with amendments, sometimes without. What happens then is that it goes back to the House floor. It'll be read back in. So it'll be referred from the committee. And then a few days later, it will go up on the House floor for final passage. When that happens, you'll have the opportunity to send out floor notes, perhaps. There are people at the Capitol that you can work with to get notes to legislators' desks saying that you are a fan of the bill or opposed to it. But short of that, you don't really get a chance. You can hang out in the back part of the legislature and, you know, wait for your legislator to walk through there, which is really kind of fun. And everybody should try it, honestly. But, you know, that's kind of the end of your participation until it goes over to the Senate. It gets read into the Senate again. It'll be referred from the House, goes to the Senate, and all of this works in retro order too, if it starts in the Senate and goes to the House. But then it gets read in, it gets referred again to a committee. That's another chance that you have to go testify, to let your will be known. Same exact process, red cards, green cards. Then, you know, the same exact process happens in Senate committee, and then it can be referred back to the whole Senate with amendments or without, and then it'll be heard on the Senate floor where you have the same basic process as in the House. If it was amended, sometimes it has to go to conference committee where the House and Senate can pretty privately, unfortunately, decide how they're going to accept those amendments. And they can really do a lot of things at that point. So that's somewhere you should really pay attention. But then the House will generally vote to accept the Senate amendments, and then it has to go back to the Senate to accept that, depending on the situation, sometimes to also be concurred in. And then, you know, it's off to the governor's desk. I mean, there's a few little pit stops, but generally speaking, off to the governor's desk to be signed into law.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and you've managed to touch a little bit, or I should say a lot, on the question that I was going to pose to you next, and that is that committees are very powerful. Why don't you share with us how they intentionally select members of the legislature to serve on specific committees, and talk about the power of the chairman of each committee?
Yeah, well, the chairman, to a large degree, can decide if your bill gets heard or not. There's some latitude that the legislator will have to say, no, I want this heard in a committee. But the chairman can generally say, just doesn't seem important to me. I've had it happen to me on occasion, and it's pretty infuriating. But the power, really, they have a lot of power, but tremendous amount of power rests with the Speaker and the Senate President, because those guys pick who's going to be on the committee. So let's say, for instance, right now, you know, the House and the Senate are controlled by Republicans. So they can decide that a committee that they don't want any sort of more left-leaning legislation to pass, like labor, is a good example. I know that's something that's near and dear to United Way's heart. They can stack that committee with just enough left-leaning people and way a lot of right-leaning people, and just enough passionate right-leaning people that would never vote for something. And of course, it could go in the opposite direction, but right now our legislature is controlled on the right. So the power that those committee chairmen have to stack a committee, and the power that a chairman has to tell all of their committee members too what they want them to do. And the Speaker and the Senate President can say, your vote with me. I mean, some Senate presidents and speakers are more direct and more you know, with telling the legislatures what they want them to do, but there's a tremendous amount of power in those positions.
Well, you know, Julie, I really feel like I'm personally compelled to ask you to expand on something that you and I have experienced personally. When your life has been impacted, either positive or negative, about a policy issue that's going to be surfacing in committee, let's talk about how important it is. Because if you are fortunate enough to have a legislator sponsor your bill, the chairman says it will be heard in committee, and you get there and you can testify first person. You see, what I don't want individuals listening to this call to assume is that you have to be a policy professional in order to testify. I've seen some of the most profound presentations in a committee hearing by individuals who have never before testified in committee, but they told a compelling story. I saw it happen, and it contributed greatly to the profound success we saw in domestic violence. But Julie, sitting alongside of you when we advocated for breast cancer research policy, I have never in my life been so transformed by the reaction of the committee. You see, we've got to understand that these legislators, no matter how bright they are, they do not know what policy impacts your life. And telling that story, I've seen it change how you didn't think something was going to pass, and all of a sudden it's unanimous.
Yeah, that's right. And that cannot be oversold. I mean, that's so important. And I watched, and I'll just give an example of a bill that I had a couple of years ago, and it might even be the one that you're thinking about. But I had a bill that the purpose of it was to stop insurance companies from being able to use what's called step therapy. And it's also called fail first protocols, because in essence, what they do at that point is to say, okay, you have stage 4 metastatic cancer. I mean, that is a terrifying place to be. But we're going to say that you have to use the cheapest intervention first, and then work your way up until you get to the one that your doctor might have ordered that's new and expensive, and they don't want to see you have to do, or they don't want to pay for it. I mean, let's be frank, that's what it's about. And when I took that bill up to the House, I mean, that's a tough bill, because I'll tell you, insurance mandates, when you force insurance companies to do a certain thing, have been kind of frowned upon for many years in Louisiana. And the most important witness we had wasn't the one to explain the science of things, wasn't the one to explain the deep insurance ramifications of it. It was the woman, Kelly. Yes. Kelly had been hurt a lot by these fail first protocols and by standard types of coverage for care. And she told the story of how she's fighting a battle that she's eventually going to lose, and that they were trying to make her do X and Y before she did Z, and ultimately there was not a dry eye in the place.
Right.
And some of those bills where you're making business do a certain thing, that kind of testimony that people can connect with. People connected with me because they saw what I went through in my own breast cancer battle. But that day in committee, Kelly,
it was transformational. It was transformational. And I think what I want is for individuals on this call, if you have not been in a committee and you haven't experienced that, I want you to be confident and strong, because if you're passionate about it, make your voice heard. Now, as we prepare to close out this program, did you want to say something else?
I just want to say, if you're in that situation, speak professionally. You can get emotional, but don't get loud, and don't be too quiet. Speak in a voice where they can understand you and hear you. And if you can help it, go in there with bullet points and not a prepared thing where you're reading, because these guys do tend to trail off, and you've got to keep their attention with that eye contact as much as you can.
Right. Well, Julie, as we prepare to close out this question and answer period, I'd like you to share with our guests this evening a really powerful example of what you have witnessed as successful grassroots lobbying.
Yeah, so, there's been a few things. I watch as the trach moms. Okay, so there's, a group of moms that have to go to the legislature and fight for funding for waivers so that their kids, who are mostly on trachs, so they have trach tubes and they're sick and they need a lot of care, and I watch as these women would come in there with all their matching shirts and so passionate. They bring their kids, and it wasn't always easy, and I'm going to be honest. I mean, there's some sessions where I don't think they did those women justice, and we are always dealing with limited resources in the state. But those women did an amazing job of pulling together and getting out there and letting their presence be seen in a hard enough but soft enough way where they were able to connect with that emotional story. And you've seen that waiver funding go up. And that's so important. That's a good example of very positive, important grassroots efforts.
Well, Julie, I think it's fair to say that we are not only honored, but we've all learned so much from you by being able to have this personal, intimate conversation with you, and to really be able to have you share with us your legislative expertise. You have done us a remarkable favor, and we are so honored to be your partner in this work. And it's now my privilege to turn the program over so that we can really engage and have some really good, rich conversation with the audience. So Dr. Teamer, it's back to you.
Thank you. And I really enjoyed listening to the dialogue between the two of you. And I also want to thank our participants who sent questions ahead of time. So the first question that we have is, how do you, and I struggle with this, so I love this question. How do you balance getting involved in advocacy when your personal advocacy does not speak for your work advocacy?
That's a great question. And, fortunately for me, it's not one that I've had to struggle with yet. There could easily come a time for that. I know that for me, honestly, it would be difficult to advocate for something I just didn't believe in. Now, if we're talking more about that you want to advocate for something that perhaps your employer might not love. Okay, there we go. Yeah. I honestly, depending on your employer, would possibly go to them, and talk to them and say, look, I know where you guys are and I respect that, but I've got something that's so deeply on my heart. And I promise that when I go there, I'll be super respectful and I'll never, drag you as my employer into this. If you don't mind, I really would clear it with my employer though. And hopefully if your employer says no, depending on the situation, because I can think of nuances where maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. But you might want to think about getting another job and one where they support your beliefs and your standards,
Well, and for me, I think if you approach your employer and you actually share with them what it is, and then you're very respectful in the way you communicate, because what you have to say is, I want you to know that I am representing my personal opinion, not that of my employer. Or if you're someone like me and you're advocating on behalf of, fortunately, God put me where I am at United Way. I am so passionate and they are so supportive about the things I care about. But I can tell you, if in fact that came up, you would need to clarify that, because you never want the legislator to make the wrong assumption either, because you never know what that would do. And personally, I feel an incredible loyalty to the individual that employs me and the organization that I work for. So I would never want to put them in a situation to where in any way it would be detrimental to their overall health and well-being. I would never do that.
That's right.
Yeah, and I appreciate the response. And I have to say, I've paid attention to my employment handbook, and even with like putting signs in your yard, or like presently I work for a firm that's bipartisan, right?
Yeah.
And so just being careful about representing Toya versus representing the firm, and making sure that you're clear about that. But with the signs in the yard, I do have to tell y'all, I always tell them, my name is not the only name on
In the house.
Yeah.
So it's really my husband, it's not me. But anyway.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Julie. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I completely agree. And I think the whole thing, being successful at advocacy, and quite frankly, being successful at life, is about, for me, it's about respecting the other side.
Yes.
or listening and trying to, I think it's really important, and a lot of what I found at Ellevate on, to hear everybody out. And that's sort of not in the biggest amount of vogue at the moment, you know, but I think that listening to other people and trying to understand where they come from shows respect. It gets you out of some of those dilemmas, and it's more constructive than anything else.
There's another question that I love. It says, when is it best to move forward as a new voice versus finding an established group to support?
Yeah, I don't know when, but I think you feel it, you know. I know for me, I found myself in a unique position, having come out of the legislature, and feeling like I had learned so much from that experience, but also that I had a unique view of our times in a way. And for me, because one of my things is the hyperpartisanship, I have a unique view to that I wanted to use. And nobody was using that I could find in the same way that I wanted to use it. And, you know, I knew it was right in my heart. Now, that doesn't mean that I couldn't have lost my steam at any time. I actually, when I wanted to start my own endeavor and start Ellevate Louisiana and cancer advocacy too, you know, we knew that you have to keep pushing, because when you start something new, you can always get it in your head, well, nobody really cares. You know, everything else that you have on your to-do list gets more important. I know for Ellevate, I actually had to hire somebody, because it was like, I knew that she would keep saying, well, what about this you said you wanted to do? Instead of it just like falling off my to-do list, you know? But I think you have to know that in your heart.
But Toya, I want to give you a really profound example. You know, until both Kim Sport and I had been personally impacted by domestic violence, and the fact that we had funded that work for a long time, we were not as engaged in the advocacy piece of domestic violence. And still we started doing some of the research, and we realized how profoundly important that was to everything we were investing in around those services. But I have to tell you that finding a new voice, I wish Mary Claire was on the phone with us right now, because those advocates, and you've heard Helena Moreno say this repeatedly, the Domestic Violence Prevention Commission, the New Orleans Family Justice Center, those individuals, quote unquote, that year after year after year were doing the domestic violence heavy lifting. They were on the front lines. They were thrilled that we decided to go to them, and we represented an unlikely partner that had never before said, we're going to champion and we're doing this. And let me tell you, for them, it brought an army of new people who had been educated, inspired, and that voice brought about a higher level of attention by individuals who were affectionately respecting our brand, who were legislators, who said, oh my God, well, United Way's doing it. And I have to tell you, sometimes it is in your best interest to go outside that network, because it can be a powerful tool in creating even greater opportunity for you to be successful beyond your dreams.
You know, something that you guys said, and something that I thought about my own story, is that oftentimes a big calling, like to go out on your own and start your own thing, it sounds like to me, when I listen to my own story and you and Kim Sport, that sometimes it comes out of the lowest points in your life.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I mean, when I left the legislature, I was honestly at one of the lower points in my life. You know, it was like I had just been through cancer. I had gone through just fights. I mean, just such fights, you know, and I was really at a low point. And all I could think is that same turning your mess into your ministry.
Yes, right.
It's just how I've chosen to live and look at what's broken, and how can I use that story? How can I use this experience to bring light where there's darkness, even in my own situation?
Yes. And we do want to remind those that are on that this is an open Q&A, so please share anything you'd like to know in the chat. And I do want to just add two things around what you all are saying, and even for myself. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I got engaged with Women United, because of my own passion around women's issues and children's issues. And even though I have a voice, I felt like it was a stronger voice by being a part of a larger group of women who were interested in that same cause. And one of the reasons why within Women United, we now have the Women's Coalition, because now you have even more voices, and there are other groups, Charmaine, that we had not previously been engaged in, that now we're aligning our agendas around these issues. And I would say for me, I would probably use my individual voice only if I noted that there was a gap in what I believed in, what I was passionate about, and there were no other avenues to advocate for that particular issue.
Yeah. That's it. That's totally accurate. I agree with that.
So I have one question left here, if there are no other questions that pop up in the chat, and that's, how do you overcome the struggle of advocating, but keep from being controversial in a way to drive healthy change?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to being curious about the other people's points of view and being willing to inspect your own points of view and making sure that they come from a healthy, emotionally healthy, logical place. I think emotionally healthy and logical, those are the two things that I think of. If you feel like your argument is that, and you can frame it in a way that's constructive, and constructive means that you're going to build bridges with people, because you're not going to go in there by just ranting and raving about what you think. You've got to replace anger with curiosity, be willing to share your own opinions. And, there'll be times in that struggle. And I think it's really important to remember that when it seems like it's just not going well and people aren't listening, and you're trying to bring something to this world that you feel like doesn't matter for a hot minute. I mean, honestly, I go through that with Ellevate all the time. I finish an event and I'm like, this is great. We're killing it. And then a few days later, I'm like, does it even matter? And you have to learn how to turn, just to know that when things are getting tough, just hold on and just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Keep that constructive, logical, emotionally healthy, a conversational thing going, and engage people and build bridges, and you're going to be fine.
I would say, Toya, do your homework, but more importantly, be patient. Because, if you talk to any seasoned legislator, it usually takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years to pass effective, good legislation. It is very rare that you introduce a legislative instrument that you automatically get. And, sometimes we get spoiled, because when you do have that success, you kind of think it ought to go like that. But for those listening on this call, we have been championing issues at United Way, like elimination of pay secrecy, like a minimum wage, all the things that we know would really lift up vulnerable ALICE families, and we have not yet been successful. And it took us 10 years to get new increased substantial investment in early care and education as a general appropriations. And you got to just keep fighting. You got to just never give up and build constituencies that can broaden that. I mean, we started out with a dozen people supporting early care and education or organizations. We now have over 100, and we're continuing to build that momentum. And we're engaging not only in the research, but we're bringing in the media. And you can't underestimate the opportunity to connect and tell that story with good information to the print media, to the news media, because they want to help you when it's something they believe in too.
Right. Well, I want to say one last thing, because, I'm a data geek, so I always talk about this. So Charmaine, you and Julie talked about passion, you talked about patience, and you talked about persistence. We also talked about bipartisanship and building relationships. But where does the factual information fall into the process? to be able to get legislation passed? Meaning that
it's everything.
It's everything. And let me tell you, you can cry or get mad or get angry if you do not build a compelling case as to why this needs to change. So you better be prepared to work harder in providing either the collaborative partnerships that can build that research component for you, but you go without the data, the likelihood of you being successful is zero.
That's where that logical piece is. You've got to have a logical case. And, you know, like I've watched too, where you can have a logical case, you can be doing all the right things. And you've got a legislature that's not going to open to it. And that's politics.
Yes.
And it's very unfortunate. The right thing doesn't always happen. And I watch as things that should happen take years to happen, and sometimes wonder, will it ever happen? But it's definitely worth the fight, but you do have to fight it with data.
Well, I want to thank both of you for answering those questions. This was a wonderful conversation, but I know Mary wants us to stop so that she can give some next steps. But I really do want to thank you, Julie, and you, Charmaine. This was wonderful. I'm in the work, but I still learn so much from the two of you, and just look forward to continuing to work with you. And so, Mary, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. And I mean, you're incorrect. I could listen to this all night. I don't want y'all to stop, but I do have to want to be respectful of everyone's time. So hi, everyone. My name is Mary Johns, and I have the pleasure of working with Charmaine at United Way of Southeast Louisiana, with her in public policy, and then also with our Young Leaders United group. So on behalf of Young Leaders United, Retire United, and Women United, thank you to Charmaine, Julia, and Toya. Y'all were fantastic. This was so informational and also inspirational. I also want to say thank you to our attendees. And we don't want this to stop here. We want you to stay involved. We want you to stay engaged. So I'm going to pull up my screen and give you just two quick ways that you can get involved with Advocacy with United Way. So one is signing up for advocacy alerts. You know, session is in full swing, and we are sending out advocacy alerts almost daily. So these are just quick emails about ways that you can get involved with specific bills. So that's a great place if you're interested in starting and kind of seeing what's going on. And then also save the date for Early Education Day at the Capitol. That's happening on May 18th. And Women United is actually going to be hosting a virtual watch party for part of Early Ed Day at the Capitol. So we're really excited about that, and we would love to have you there. And with that, I'm going to say—
Could I ask one favor?
Absolutely.
Julie's on, and Elevate's going to have a day at the Capitol also. So Julie?
Yeah, so on April 27th, which is like in a week and a half now, because time's flying, Elevate's having the day at the legislature too. And we've really got a good lineup. We're going to meet with the governor. We're going to have some dragos in the lieutenant governor's office with legislators, and have desk gifts for the legislators, and have a table in the rotunda, and really give general information for anybody that wants to learn more about how to do business with the legislature.
Fantastic. We'll definitely send that out in the follow-up email as well, so everybody has that. But with that, thank you once again, everyone. We will share the link to the recording afterwards. And I hope you all have a great night and stay safe and dry.
Thank you all. This was fun.
Thank you so much for including me. It means a lot.